Hi, I'd like to talk to you today about Psalm 137, which contains some violent language and violent images which have caused some interpretive difficulties with people through the years. Most people actually, when they read these passages, they're repulsed by them and they quickly skip over them and move away from them to get to something more pleasant and easy to think about. And they don't spend a lot of time thinking about Psalm 137, either its historical context or the use of the language or its uh, Old Testament precedents. And so they fail to come to an understanding of Psalm 137, and particularly these difficult passages. So what I'd like to do right now is take a look at Psalm 137 and spend a little bit of time looking at its historical context and thinking about the violent image and seeing if we can make some steps toward properly interpreting that. I've put together a slideshow, a PowerPoint presentation that may be helpful, so I'm going to bring that up right now. This slideshow is called Dashing the Little Ones Against the Rock, Understanding the Violent Language of Psalm 137. Let's start out by reading Psalm 137. There are 3 slides for this. So the first part of Psalm 137 starts out this way. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our lyres, for there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, Sing us one of the songs of Zion. So the setting is they are sitting by the waters of Babylon. The Jews are in Babylon after having been exiled into Babylon. Jerusalem has fallen, the temple has fallen, the people have been exiled, and their Babylonian captors are tormenting them by asking them to sing songs of Zion, happy songs of Zion, about how great their God is and how their God will always protect them. And it's basically a mockery. The second part of the psalm continues. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. Let my tongue stick to the roof of my mouth. If I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem, how they said, lay it bare, down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall he be who repays you with what you have done to us. Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. That's the ending of the psalm. It's the last 2 verses, particularly verse 9, which are problematic for people. They read, O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall he be who repays you with what you have done to us. Blessed shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. People read this, and in particular that last part, and they think, this is really unbecoming. This is a cry for vengeance. It's bloodthirsty and vicious. And this image is just repulsive. And how can this be in God's word? And they move on. But that's not the best response. The best response is to seek to understand what is being said and why it's being said and the way it's being said. So there are some key questions we need to ask. First, the psalmist asserts that Babylon is doomed to be destroyed. How does he know that? Second, the psalmist speaks of dashing babies against the rock. Is this language used elsewhere in the Bible? Third, verses 8 and 9 call for Babylon to be paid back for what they have done. Is this a cry for vengeance or for justice? Finally, in verse 8, the psalmist calls for a blessing upon the one who repays Babylon. Who is the psalmist calling blessed, and why? Now, the context is important here. We need to think about what's happening. I've already mentioned some of that context in a broader picture. Let me just give you a little bit of background. The subjugation of Judah took place in 3 stages over the course of several years, beginning in 605 BC with the deportation of the elite of Judah into Babylon. The final stage included the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, and the carrying away into exile the remaining able-bodied Jews into Babylon. This took place in 586 BC, and Jerusalem fell after the fall of Jerusalem in 586 and the destruction of the temple. The remaining able-bodied Jews were carried into Babylon. Now, during the siege of Jerusalem, many atrocities were committed by the Babylonians. And this psalm appears to imply that the killing of Jewish children by smashing them against the stones was among the atrocities. The cry for the same to be done to the Babylonian children is actually a cry for justice. Now, what about the language of dashing little ones? It turns out that it's not restricted to just Psalm 137. In other words, it appears in other places in the Old Testament. And in fact, there are 5 other examples in the Old Testament, and we will look at those right now. So in 2 Kings 8:12, Elisha prophesies, and he is prophesying the destruction that Hazael, the king of Aram, would bring upon the Israelites. Here's the word of God. And Hazael said, "Why does my Lord weep?" He answered, "Because I know the evil that you will do to the people of Israel. You will set on fire their fortresses, and you will kill their young men with the sword, and dash in pieces their little ones, and rip open their pregnant women." This is actually more graphic, a little more offensive than Psalm 137. But here we have 2 Kings dashing in pieces their little ones. In Isaiah 13, verses 16 and 18, this is a prophecy of the destruction of Babylon by the Medes. Their infants will be dashed in pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be plundered and their wives ravished. Their bows will slaughter the young men, and they will have no mercy on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes will not pity children. In Hosea, we have 2 examples. Here's the first one. Hosea 10:14. This is an element from the destruction of Beth Arbel by Shalman. It's being used by Hosea in his prophecy of the destruction of Israel. Here's what he writes. "Therefore the tumult of war shall arise among your people, and all your fortresses shall be destroyed, as Shalman destroyed Beth Arbel on the day of battle. Mothers were dashed in pieces with their children." The second example in Hosea is Hosea 13:16, a prophecy against Samaria, the capital of Israel. "Samaria shall bear her guilt because she has rebelled against her God. They shall fall by the sword. Their little ones shall be dashed in pieces, and their pregnant women ripped open." Again, a very unpleasant image, but the language is now, this is the 4th time in the Old Testament that it's been used. The final one is in Nahum 3:10. Now, in Nahum 3:10, an element in the description of the fall of Thebes is being used as part of a prophecy against Nineveh, the capital city of Assyria. Yet she became an exile. She went into captivity. Her infants were dashed in pieces at the head of every street. For her honored men, lots were cast, and all her great men were bound in chains. So there were 5 other Old Testament examples, 6 total, including Psalm 137. How do these relate to each other chronologically? Well, if you look at the list there, you'll see that Psalm 137 is at the very bottom, meaning that it is the last one chronologically in all of the examples. The first one was 2 Kings, and then we had the 2 in Hosea, then Isaiah, they're roughly around the same time, and Nahum, and then Psalm 137. So it's not even the first use of this language. And in fact, it's the last use in the Old Testament. So one other consideration that we might think about the language is the language figurative. Now, of course, figurative language is based on something, and the something that actually happened was that during warfare, children would be dashed against rocks, and pregnant women would be ripped open, torn open, and very terrible things happen in war. But the language being used over and over again in the Old Testament like that has given some interpreters the thought that perhaps it's figurative of just justice and destruction. This is Robert Stein. This slide represents, there are 2 slides here. This is half of the quotation. Another idiom that has caused great difficulty is found in Psalm 137, 8 and 9. And then he quotes the passages. The repulsive nature of the imagery is evident to all. How could the psalmist wish this upon the children of Babylon, even if they were his enemies? Yet the idiomatic nature of the saying means something different than a desire for bloodthirsty vengeance. The imagery found here was tragically enough, not uncommon in warfare. And those are the passages that we have looked at. What the psalmist is describing, however, is not a wish for vicious revenge upon Babylon, but a desire for God's justice to be accomplished. He wishes for God's righteous judgment to fall upon the evil kingdom of Babylon. In his desire for divine justice, he uses the imagery of his day to describe the overthrow of nations. Stein goes on, it is interesting to note that in several ancient illustrations of a king's reign, we find that the son of the king is sitting on his father's lap, and the defeated and subject peoples are depicted beneath not the father's feet, but the son's. Thus, the judgment of the king of Babylon must also involve the judgment of his sons. Only in this way will the evil dynasty be judged and destroyed. This idiom, therefore, should be understood and interpreted in light of the imagery of its day, and what the author is seeking to describe by the use of this imagery. The author is longing for the divine justice to manifest itself in the overthrow of this evil empire. Robert Stein, in his book Playing by the Rules, A Basic Guide to Interpreting the Bible, Baker Books, 1994, page 120. Stein is not alone in his assessment there. And just to summarize what he said, in the above quotation, what he said is the imagery conveys the idea of the overthrow of the nation being spoken about. The primary sentiment conveyed is not a desire for bloodthirsty vengeance, but rather a desire for God's justice to be accomplished. So, perhaps the language is figurative, even if it's not, though. We still may be able to understand what's going on. Context is really important. Isaiah 13 and Psalm 137, the link between them is important. Isaiah 13 is particularly important. Isaiah 13 and Psalm 137 both contain language of dashing little ones against the rock. We read that earlier. Both apply this dashing of children to Babylon. That's significant. Now, Isaiah 13 prophesies the certain future destruction of Babylon. This is important. Likewise, Psalm 137 in verse 8 speaks of the certain future destruction of Babylon. In Psalm 137 verse 8, Babylon is said to be, quote, doomed to destruction, end quote. The certainty of the doom of Babylon finds its source in this prophecy of Babylon's destruction recorded in Isaiah 13. And as indicated, Isaiah 13 was written sometime between 740 and 700 BC. Psalm 137 was written between 100 and 200 years afterwards. Now, let's look at these two. Isaiah 13:8 and Psalm 137:8 and 9. You can see them there. We've read them both. Isaiah 13:8, whoever is found will be thrust through, and whoever is caught will fall by the sword. Their infants will be dashed in pieces before their eyes. Their houses will be plundered, and their wives ravished. Psalm 137:8 and 9. O daughter of Babylon, doomed to be destroyed, blessed shall be he who repays you with what you have done to us. Blessed shall be he who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rock. So Psalm 137 verse 9 merely repeats the language from Isaiah's original prophecy against Babylon. This is to be expected as the two passages are sharing the same subject. Since the psalmist has understood from Isaiah 13 that Babylon is doomed to destruction, it is perfectly reasonable that he would reuse language from the earlier prophecy in his own psalm, which looks forward to that coming doom. There's one other thing in the psalm which we want to look at. The psalm says, Psalm 137, verse 8 and 9, so far we've been focusing on verse 9, but in verse 8 it says, blessed shall he be who repays you. Blessed shall be he who repays you. Who are they talking about? In Psalm 137, verse 8, the psalmist is looking forward to the one who will come and who will destroy Babylon. How does the psalmist know about this one individual? Again, Isaiah provides the answer. In Isaiah 13:7, we see that Babylon will be overthrown by the Medes. This is repeated almost 150 years later by Daniel, who is himself in Babylon in Daniel 2:7, and specifically in 8:20. And Daniel adds to that in 8:20 that the fall of Babylon will be accomplished by the coalition of the Medes and Persians. The prophecies of Daniel were given in 602, 550, and 548. In addition, Isaiah 44 and 45 predicts the fall of Babylon, the releasing of the Jews from exile, the repopulating and rebuilding of Jerusalem, and the laying of the foundations of the temple. Isaiah 44:28 and 45:1 give the name of the coming ruler who will accomplish these things as Cyrus, the coming one. Cyrus was born around 600 BC and lived until approximately 530. He became king of Persia in 559 and of Persia and Media in 550. He is known as Cyrus the Great. The Blessed One. Psalm 137, 8 and 9 are a call for God to bring justice. However, it appears that the primary thought in these verses is that of blessing for the one through whom the Lord will work, through whom the Lord will bring this promised justice. Thus, the sentiment expressed in these verses is not hatred and the desire for vengeance, but a prayer for the Lord to accomplish through his instrument Cyrus the just and righteous destruction of Babylon that he had promised so long ago through the prophet Isaiah. Thank you for watching. I hope that this has been instructive. May the Lord bless you.